Hello there. This is Stacey Sanderson, and I am recording this video from my clinic office. So I don't have the fancy lighting or the fancy microphone, but interestingly, the most views I had in the past were using this raw dogging it kind of format. So, if nothing else, this is a lovely, peaceful, quiet environment, exactly where all of the conversations happen with clients that inspire this content. And what I'm endeavoring to do in my role as therapist, teacher, guide, writer is to offer up a different, more integrative, holistic way of looking at narcissism, but more importantly, to just cut through all of the noise and confusion and transcend what's available in the diagnostic criteria information, which is such a small fraction of what's available and what's helpful on this particular subject. So, what I wanted to talk about this afternoon, it's afternoon here where I am, and we have a storm coming here. But what I want to focus on is narcissistic siblings. So, this could be siblings with narcissistic personality disorder. This is going to talk about narcissistic patterns within families a little bit. And generally speaking, this is not the same as siblings we have problems with. This is not the same as siblings who move in and out of patterns of rivalry with us, although that's included. And it is different than, sort of typical sibling dynamic that is characterized by competitiveness and envy. What I think can be a consistent dynamic among any siblings is the competition for resources within the family. So that could be money, time, energy, love, affection. I could keep going. This is where fundamentally we separate out earlier from a sibling who frankly has narcissistic personality disorder. So naturally, if you have a sibling whom you think has NPD or is highly narcissistic, the compelling inner question is, how did that happen, right? You potentially were raised in the same family system. And that answer lives in the bigger answer around why are people narcissistic. And there is a trauma explanation that I don't think occurs as often as what I'm about to say. So the trauma explanation is that this type of personality developed as a defense mechanism against painful, perhaps physical and certainly mental abuse or benign attachment neglect, right? That's a commonly understood dynamic. But what the research is bearing out, and what I hear the most often, is that narcissists got away with more, were protected, were not given consequences for their actions, or were given different consequences than their siblings. I don't know if I said this, but they're often protected by a parent. They are often emotionally enmeshed with one parent. They are more often than not in a golden child role, although can also be, I think, the lost child. And all of the things that I've just described that are the reasons why their character developed in such a way is why the patterns in how they relate to you and everyone else continues in such a way, right? So, this is where our early attachment experiences really influence our personality development and self awareness and capacity for self esteem across the trajectory of our childhoods. And I gave a talk last week or the week before on heart mind. The somatic psychology research is that for people who have borderline narcissistic sociopathic traits, that in fact there was neurobiologically and physiologically a disruption in the development of the mirror cells between the heart and the brain, which influences the part of the brain that's responsible for self-awareness and empathy. So there are solid physiological reasons why someone would develop this way. It's probably its own video, but I wanted to give a little bit of context for how it happens within a family that one or maybe two siblings becomes narcissistic. All right. And I think that in a toxic family system, in a maladaptive adaptive or abusive family system, I think that people adapt in different ways. You know, some people may be highly sensitive and become highly empathic. Some people may become highly dissociative, right? I think that narcissism in and of itself is a somewhat dissociative adaptive capacity, or that they have parts of themselves, parts of their psyche that are continually protecting the more vulnerable parts. So that's just a little bit of an explanation for that, rather than simply regurgitating the most commonly known diagnostic and characterological traits. Well, I said that word often, I can't. So, what is it like growing up with a narcissistic sibling? I think you would start noticing the tendencies anytime around the ages of 8 and 9, which is a little bit later than when their development rather starts to be affected. You could see competitiveness, selfishness, lack of empathy, depending on how far along on the spectrum they may be. You could see cruelty. It hurts my heart to say this, but they may have been cruel to pets. You would see a vicious competitiveness, a need to be the center of attention. This is also in childhood where that tendency to be more grandiose or vulnerable is going to be developing. So if this is a child that's being rewarded for performance in any way, right, and their personality is a bit more extroverted, you can see how they would develop into more of that grandiose type of presentation. I think you see this a lot in families where one child takes on the responsibility to make the whole household look good, right? So this could be a child who's in the performative arts or high level sports. This is another example of how they get more of the family's resources, right? And I live in small town Ontario, so it's an everyday part of our existence that if one kid shows some aptitude and skill in hockey, guess where the money might be going, right? Don't get me wrong, I love hockey. So a narcissistic sibling projects their bad traits onto you. They would have created situations when you were younger where they did things to you, you got provoked, they denied what they did, and you get into trouble, right? There's that early onset of gaslighting, right? That we talk so often about. And that capacity for manipulation and gaslighting begins very, very, very early, right? It's not a behavior people choose. I've worked with families and individuals where when the narcissist is, in their teenage years, early adulthood, and even further along, they can become obsessively preoccupied with a sibling or siblings and feel entitled to what that sibling has, which includes their relationship with the parents, right? So I'm just taking all of the typical traits and applying that to a sibling. I think that this plays out along the lines of who has authenticity and who doesn't. So they really don't like you, but you don't know why. That's why. And I want to come back to what I said about entitlement. We do not talk about this enough when it comes to narcissism, but the entitlement is delusional. It's not rooted in any kind of reality. So that entitlement then begins to include that they want everything that you have, or they think they should have everything that you have, whether it's a natural gift or financial success or academic success. And it's not uncommon that the enmeshed parent will want that too. So across that lifetime, that lifespan, one parent who is enmeshed with this child, usually, sometimes there can be some estrangement, but typically that's the way this plays out. They continue to make excuses for them. They continue to have conversations with them that the other sibling or siblings might not be aware of. But all of these things play out across the lifespan. And you can imagine then the next generation. So there will be competition among the grandchildren, comparison and competition. Your life is basically the template for theirs, right? There's that lack of boundary strength. They lack awareness of their true self. And so they replace that with that envy and that competition and that comparison. So as you're moving into midlife, your parent or parents are becoming more frail. There's an escalation of this entitlement often because they have felt entitled to whatever you have and your parents have for their whole life. And they will start to be very preoccupied with this. I am going to do a separate video about narcissistic siblings and estate law. But for now, I just wanted to introduce that idea. A narcissistic sibling can start a smear campaign against you. They will often create false narratives about you. They will say things about you behind your back to influence other friends, family members. They can be really nice when they want something, and once they get whatever that is, they will then devalue and dismiss you. So it is this cycle, like all of them, of sort of charming, bringing you in to then devalue and dismiss you. Like all narcissists, they are continually emotionally dysregulated. You can look at them the wrong way and they will misinterpret that. You can say the wrong thing. You can do the wrong thing. They can dish it out, but they can't take it. I made this comment earlier today. So they can say terrible things to you and about you, but if you stand up to them, you will see their weaker and more vulnerable side. Um, one of the things I've heard over the years is, let's say you're a woman and you have a sister. They can go after your partner, your husband, your boyfriend. I've heard that story enough times to mention it here. Again, that's that entitlement. So all of the things that go along with being a narcissist, being having delusions of grandeur, being a little bit detached from reality, being competitive, living through comparison, being hyper focused on material things, going through cycles of mood issues, perhaps going through issues with substance use. That's pretty common too. It's basically a comorbidity. And being interpersonally exploitive. So, in its worst iteration, they may have stolen from you or will steal from you or will steal from your parents, right? As we move into the border of sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder a little bit, I just want to say that growing up with a narcissistic sibling is probably one of the most painful things you can experience, not because of all of the ways that they target you, although that's true, but because of the grief, right? You may believe for a long time that they're capable of change, and of course they can't. And it can feel like everyone else has this tight knit family or a sibling who's their bestie and you don't. And as a child, we internalize that and we can tend to, over the years, really blame ourselves. And that becomes part of our own self belief system. With with narcissistic siblings, we need to set boundaries just as we would any other civil level of discourse with them, limiting the way they can contact you and keeping a good amount of compassionate detachment and being careful with getting pulled into thinking that they're capable of change. And if this is helpful, if you've got questions, comment below. If you think someone out there, someone you know might benefit from hearing this message, please feel free to share or send it to them. Post it on your socials, just trying to get the word out. And I'm always available through direct message or through the website if people would like to continue the chat. And as I said, I'm going on to do a second video specifically about narcissistic siblings and estate law. So that will be posted. I'll try and post the two of them at the same time. So again, thank you so much for tuning in, listening, and I wish you a very good rest of your day.